Hello everybody and welcome to Lecture 7 on the Create Task Essays, and this will most likely be one of our longer lectures, mainly because there's a lot of content to cover. Now, last time we went over the Create Task video, very short lecture. It came out to around like 6 minutes, but it just talked about submitting a video of the program running, and then your activity was to prepare what software you're going to use to record, a script if you have any audio, and then just actually record the video. It didn't need to be perfect, just so you get a hang of it whenever you're like going to film the final one. Now, about the essays, you'll notice offhand like there's one less than what you had to do for the Explore essays. And that's mainly because there's going to be no sources that you're going to have to submit for this one. It's your software, your program, you're the one who's basically the source in this instance. So there's going to be 4 essays from A to D, and the first one's going to be about like the program as a whole and then what the video shows. This is going to be around 150 words. B is going to be about the development process, difficulties, any collaboration you had in your program, around 200 words. The third one's going to be about the algorithm, and we've mentioned the algorithm a couple times until now. This is going to be around 200 words, and then finally the abstraction, which is again going to be around 200 words. Similar to the other performance task, you're going to have to label the essay responses, and it's going to have to be submitted as one separate PDF, separate from the Explore task essay. And all the responses must not exceed a total of 750 words. So now starting with part A. Part A is very simple. You just have to provide a written response or audio narration in the video that does the following, which is identify the programming language, identifies the purpose of your program, and then explains what the video illustrates. So in this case, we're going to be assuming that you're writing a written response, even though, yeah, you may have mentioned these things in the audio narration as well, but it has to be a maximum 150 words, and then here's an example of my outline for PillPen. I wrote the programming language, which in this case was Scratch, the purpose, which was to help elderly individuals remember when they want to take their pills, and then what the video illustrates, it shows the function of the program, and then how to add a new medication, getting a reminder, and then just generally viewing the different kinds of features that can be found within PillPen. Now, SAB. This one is a little more complicated, and the reason I say that is because there's a lot of parts that come with this essay. Now, as you can see already, the essay prompt is pretty long. I'm going to read through the whole thing, but then I've divided it up into the different parts that it's asking in the essay. So, describe the incremental and iterative development process of your program, focusing on 2 points in that process. Describe the difficulties and or opportunities you encountered and how they were resolved or incorporated. In your description, clearly indicate whether the development described was collaborative or independent. At least one of these points must refer to independent programming development. That's a lot. That's definitely a lot. But don't worry, because it's a lot simpler than what it sounds like. So when it comes to the development process, you're just going to want to display the steps you took in making the program. So obviously you're going to start out by saying, oh yeah, I probably I came up with the idea, I sketched out some plans, then I actually coded it, then when I coded it, I debugged it, and then I went back and fixed all the bugs I found. Maybe I added a couple more features along the way. You want to point out all those things, but here you're going to talk specifically about 2 distinct points. Simple enough, right? Now, the difficulties, opportunities you encountered, and how they were resolved. I don't know a better way to put this. I think College Board really hit it home with this one. You just need to outline what problems you came into, or like a really good opportunity you came to, and then how you made use of those problems or those opportunities you got. Just like in detail, explain what it is. You'll get full points on this one if you do it correctly. There's not much more I can say. Whether the development was collaborative or independent. If it was collaborative, ensure that in the first part of this question, you know how we talked about the development process, ensure that one of the 2 distinct points you talked about have been done by you. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Now, you have a maximum of 200 words, definitely a little more like space in terms of how you want to say what you need to say, and that's because there's so much that we need to discuss. And here is the SAB outline that I did for PillPen. First, I talked about the development process. about how I developed the graphics before anything else. Then I started working on the code, and then I finished the rough version, and then I tested it a number of times. Every time I tested it, I fixed a bug I found, and then I tested it again, and then it just kept going and going until I felt like it was stable enough, and then obviously it was very, very critical in making the program. The difficulties and opportunities I had trouble getting, so I basically had trouble getting the algorithm that stated the medications that need to be taken at a given time to work. And I'll explain a bit more about this when I get to the algorithm part, but needless to say, after some testing, I found that adding a couple operators here and there fixed the problem. And then whether it was a team or independent, I did this all by myself, but if it was done by other people, which I know some of you guys may have that situation, make sure that you had some collaboration in the project, and then just mention, like in the first part, that one of them was done by you and explain like what you contributed. I noticed, yeah, how in this outline for the development process, I didn't really give two distinct points. I do apologize about that. But like if I were to give two distinct points, I'd probably talk first about making the code and then about the debugging aspect, because that's basically the two major things I worked on throughout the program. Now the part CSA. This essay is going to talk a bit about the algorithm. And we already went over the algorithm, which is basically just like a function or something that works through the code, uses mathematical, logical operators, and it basically automates or processes something in the code. And it has to be fundamental to your program to achieve its intended purpose. Now, capturing and pasting the code segment, we'll talk about that in our next video. But in terms of this essay, the algorithm has to be made by you. Has to include 2 or more algorithms inside of it, and you have to describe what each of those sub-algorithms do, as well as how they combine to make the main algorithm. It has to integrate a number of mathematical and or logical concepts, and then in the program code section where you have to paste all your code, which again is going to be in the next video, you're going to mark the algorithm with an oval. So this essay has a maximum of 200 words, again, pretty open as to how much you can write. And an example of this essay for PillPin would be like an important algorithm is the clocking mechanism. And it has 2 inner algorithms. 1, it maintains a timer, and then 2, it divides the current time by the increments to see if it is time to take a medicine on the list. Now, I don't know if you remember, but in the previous lecture when I showed the video, there was a brief second where I added Advil onto the list of medications. If you saw how I selected 15 minutes out of that, the slider, that 15 minutes, there's 15 minutes, there's 30 minutes, there's an hour, 2 hours, there's all these different increments, right? And so because there's going to be so many pills with so many different increments, it's going to want to divide by those increments. And so this basically does that functioning for me. Now, part D is going to be capturing and pasting the code that contains an abstraction. We went over the abstraction. It makes a lot of things, like a lot of different code or a lot of different individual items into one big item. The abstraction needs to be made by you. It has to integrate mathematical and or logical concepts, and then it has to manage the complexity of your program. There's no point in adding an abstraction if the code that you're using in that abstraction is only used once. I mean, you could do that, but generally you want to use an abstraction to lessen the amount of code that you have and make sure that it's more effective. Now in the program code section, again, you're going to have to capture and paste the code segment. We'll talk about this next video, but you're going to mark the abstraction with a rectangle. Okay. You can have a maximum of 200 words, and an example of this essay for PillPin is how it's, okay, like an important abstraction is basically like the reminder function. So as you guys saw, the check medications button or check schedule button, it gives a reminder once every increment is hit, right? So there's actually like a very, very complicated abstraction in that function. And the reason for that is because it takes in all the medications on our list, it divides by all the increments, and then it looks through to see if any one is hitting that increment right now. Because if there's a 15-second one, a 30-second one, and a 1-hour one, there's a time when all of those hit together at the same time. And that reminder needs to remind of all those medications, not just the 15-second one or the 30-second one or the 1-hour one. And what it does is it takes all those medications in, it turns it into like a long string. It has the number of the medication where it is on the list at that time, separates it by a comma, adds more, like it just makes a long string with all of them in there, and then it sends it to this abstraction. And what the abstraction basically does, it takes the number, it compares it to its location on that long list, it gets the name of the medication, and then it divides it by a comma. And then another thing that also ended up being kind of hard was, in order to make the sentence that reminds it like correct in terms of grammar, you know how it has to be like comma, 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 and the last medication. So it needed to keep tally of how many medications it had said up to that point and then add in that and. So like it sounds simple, but it's not. And I know it may not be very clear, but like the abstraction saved a lot of time in this whole process. Now, here's an activity. Begin to draft your essays. And create outlines and summaries like the ones I showed for Pilpin, but instead for your program. Again, it saves a lot of time, and honestly, like it gives you a general structure of where you want to begin when you're starting to actually write the essays. And then make sure you remember which code you use for your algorithm and abstraction, because you're going to need it for the next section when you're pasting your program code. I know most of you guys may only have like one of either one, but like if you have more than one algorithm or abstraction, just keep in mind which one you talked about. And with that being said, what we're going to review next time is just a basic screenshotting of all your code and then creating the final PDF. Thank you guys so much for watching this lecture, and I will see you again for the next time.